Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and today I wanted to do another picking the right ship video, and today we're going to be doing picking the right escort ship. Now the primary things to consider when you're picking an escort ship is something that's going to keep the enemies from damaging whatever you're trying to protect, and that can be done in a few different ways, by having superior numbers, or having superior firepower, or just being too much for the enemy to handle in some form or fashion. So before we get too far into this, I think it's worth mentioning that in the persistent universe, range is likely going to play a really important part to this story. But we just don't really know that much about range on ships at the moment beyond just the descriptions that we have. And even with those in place, we know we can add things onto ships like fuel tanks instead of missiles or get more efficient engines. And we can find ways to extend range. So with this video, I'm going to focus on the ships themselves and based on maneuverability, speed, firepower, durability, and choose the ones that I think make the best escorts in mind. And I'll probably do an update somewhere down the line, maybe once we get more information on the range and how this all impacts. But for now, let's just focus on those aspects. So starting in the cheaper scale like normal, we've got our starter ships, and I think the cheapest way to get into a decent escort is probably the Aurora LN. Well, technically the cheapest way would probably be the Merlin, but with no jump drive or no game package associated with just a Merlin. We're not going to talk about that little pest of a ship. So with the Aurora LN, we have a ship that has pretty damn good weaponry overall. And while it isn't particularly fast or maneuverable, the ship is durable, which I think makes a really important, kind of benefit for a ship that's in an escort role. As an escort, you can't just run away when you get into trouble. Your one job is to protect the ship that you're flying with, and sometimes winning the war of attrition is the only way to really make that happen. The LN is just better armed and outperforms the Mustang starters when it comes to durability. So while the LN isn't going to chase down any threats that are running away, you're more likely to continue on your journey in the LN than you would with any of the Mustangs. I suppose that comes with one caveat though, and that being the Delta is a Mustang, and I think it makes for a great escort. But the Delta isn't exactly a starter ship based on the price or performance, but it is a limited sales ship as part of the Mustang line. The Delta has an ace in the hole that I think gives it a real advantage to being an escort, and that's the rocket pods that come stock with the ship. These pods are what gives the Delta an ability to really kind of punch above its weight class. The pods are unguided, but they're powerful, meaning that they're hard to use but have a huge reward when you're able to land them. They're extremely powerful against smaller targets, but I think they're really going to shine against larger ones. So while the Delta could be an option for attacks from cutlasses, retaliators, all that sort of stuff, it also retains the speed and ability to compete with smaller targets like the Gladius. You can also technically remove the rocket pods and go with 6 lasers, which I think is fun in theory, but on top of having, questions about, what that power plant can actually end up supporting in the end, I don't like the idea of giving up the flexibility when you don't know what you're going to be facing. One final note about the Delta, though, is that it has stealthy armor, and while that's a great thing 90% of the time, when you're escorting, you want to be seen. You don't want people to, I guess here's the situation. You don't want people to attack a ship that they would otherwise just kind of ignore. You don't want people to kind of scoot up to your freelancer that you're escorting and see all of a sudden that you're there, and then maybe they're kind of like backed into a corner and then they're forced to fight. You're there to deter others and then fight them if you need to. So as far as stealth on an escort ship, I actually don't think it's a great thing to have. It's not a deal breaker, but it's something you need to be aware of. Now, in a similar price range to the Delta, we also have the Avenger, and not far off from that is the 325A. And to this point, I've debated the 325 versus the Avenger countless times. So while I know this may be the first video of mine you're going to see, it's kind of an age-old debate. Primarily because they're in a similar price range and they're both sold as combat ships. And I think what it really comes down to with these ships from a combat perspective is how you like to fight. If you place more value in missiles than guns, then go with the 325A for sure. It carries larger missiles and it has that Willis Ops targeting system, which is going to allow you to launch missiles and track different targets simultaneously. If you prefer guns, the nose gun on the Avenger can be absolutely devastating. You can also compare the stock guns and go by preference on that if you want, specifically with the nose gun. If you like the spammability of a Gatling gun, then the Avenger wins hands down. But if you have good aim and control, then the mass driver on the nose gun of the 325 is a pretty good choice too. They fly and handle very similarly to each other, and I think either really could be a good ship in an escort role. I think the 325A is going to end up being I don't know, it's probably going to end up having slightly better range because it's built on a touring ship platform. But for combat, it's also built on a touring ship platform. The Avenger was built with combat and police work in mind, whereas the 300 series was built to cruise the verse and style. Either way, you're going to be fine. It doesn't really matter which one you choose, so take whichever one you prefer based on your weapon preferences, or maybe start with the cheaper Avenger and upgrade later if you want at that point. It's worth noting, both of these ships are getting reworks, and we're about to see variants for the Avenger, so things could change once we get more information on both of those. Up next a little bit in price is the older military primary fighter, and that's the Gladius. And the Gladius is labeled as a short-range patrol fighter, so like mentioned before, I do have some concerns about range. But taking that out of the equation, the Gladius is damn near perfect for an escort ship. It's faster than most ships, the agility is way above average, the Gatling gun on the nose does tremendous damage, and it carries a pretty large amount of missiles for a smaller ship. And while the ship isn't going to be as durable as some of the other options out there, the maneuverability and speed to avoid a lot of real threats that can cause damage is going to help you prevent a lot of issues. The maneuverability also allows you to dictate where fights take place. And let's say you're protecting a ship that only has a top turret. You can try and push the fight in that direction, allowing you to do damage while the cargo vessel is also providing supporting fire. It's not always about needing to take the fight from start to finish in your ship. It's about creating the situation that works best for your team, for your little, cargo tandem. And a ship like the Gladius really kind of shines in that light. The Gladius right now is one of my favorite combat ships, and I think it makes for an outstanding option as escorts are concerned, though we're going to need more information on range to really talk about its long-term proficiency in this role. I think worst case scenario, it's a great choice for a couple of jumps, but it may be limited in long-range journeys. Then again, that may end up just being the norm. You may end up needing to plan on stopping for fuel along the way, and who knows, maybe your cargo ship even needs to do that too. Again, we're just going to have to wait and see how this all plays out. As we continue up in price, I think there's a lot of ships between the $150 to $200 range that make for really good options. Much like the Gladius, we have the Car 2 All, which is the Xi'an Scout, that is supposed to be fast, around 270 meters per second, which puts it at racer speeds pretty much, and with an expected maneuverability that should probably be the best in the game, it should be fantastic at protecting your little fleet. As I've said before, it's a ship that I regret more than any not buying, so if you have interest, keep an eye on the anniversary sale this November. While I'm waiting to see more information on the armament of this ship, I think it should be sufficiently armed to deal with most fighter threats, and the maneuverability and speed should put it into a good situation against larger threats that may allow you to at least wear them down and get them to a point where they just want to run away. Remember though, as long as they leave you and you end up reaching your destination, it's a victory for you and your cargo team. You don't need to destroy the enemy to chalk it up as a victory. So, while the Gladiator was initially created as a carrier-based bomber, the civilian version is also described as an exploration-capable ship. So now you've got a ship that's capable of being set up as a missile boat, has a turret, and potentially really good range. I think the amount of missiles is really going to help the Gladiator be a good escort because you have the potential to deal with more than one or larger targets. And while it may not be a real nimble option, it is really, really durable. And the second gunner or turret give you better coverage on the battlefield and more potential to deal with more than one threat if they choose to engage. You also get flexibility in choosing the size of missiles that you want to bring, and that could mean taking on a mixed size fleet versus just carrying one type of missile and hope that you brought the right ones for that fight. I think you could also probably end up equipping this with a combination of some real missiles and electronic warfare missiles, meaning that you could potentially just blast off some EMPs and then just get the hell out of Dodge. You don't normally think of a ship like this in the context of an escort, but I still think it ends up being a good fit in the end. We also have the Cutlass Blue, which I find is kind of having some of the same benefits of the Gladiator, with its additional turret located on the back of the ship. But it also boasts, larger shields, better armor, which is going to allow it to survive longer than the Cutlass Black. And the agility of the Cutlass line allows you to compete with fighters and hopefully prevent them from pestering you too bad. Also, like the Gladiator, we have the Freelancer Miss, which boasts a crazy amount of missiles, including the replenishing system, which I think allows you to take on another role not mentioned before, and that's the Disruptor. If you have ships that are coming in to engage, but they're constantly having to deal with a slew of missiles that you're just launching in their general direction, it just may not be worth the time or effort or the risk of being destroyed for them to continue the attack. And while the maneuverability is likely to be substandard as compared to the fighters, you also have the massive guns on this modified cargo ship to really do some serious damage. I think the primary weapons on the Mists are going to have more success against larger targets because I have questions about their overall convergence into the center. But having a turret on top and the missile count kind of balances that out nicely for some of the smaller targets that you may be facing. The Aegis Saber is an interesting option too, and I think my gut initially says that it would be great. It's designed to be fast, agile, and it's able to hit pretty hard. But like mentioned with the Delta though, the stealth factor in this role could be potentially a negative thing. I'm not looking at the Saber as a great long-range option, and the durability is expected to be decent at best. I mean, you get the benefit of having redundant systems, meaning you're less likely to be totally left behind or destroyed, but it's not built to just sit in a fight. It's more designed to do hit-and-run tactics from the edge of the battlefield. I think as part of an escort fleet, it would be great, but if we're talking about one escort, it may not be the best choice. Instead, another Aegis ship is the Vanguard, and I think where it really shines is here. And really, all three of these ships could really find a lot of value. You know, when I say all three of these ships, I mean the three different variants. The Warden has the massive nose gun and the forward-facing weaponry that can shred smaller targets. The Sentinel could unleash electronic warfare to disable the threats before they really even become a threat. And the Harbinger could easily just overwhelm the target by launching the missiles and torpedoes and the rocket from the turret on the back of the ship. You know, all three of these ships have value, and it's really sold as a long-range ship with legendary durability, and all of that to me screams escort. The agility of the ship is probably going to be decent at best, but I think it's going to be very fast in a straight line. So I think it could end up having some issues in close quarters combat, and I think that's probably the one limiting factor when it comes to the Vanguard. I think probably the Warden is the best option overall for escorting, and I think when it comes to long-range escorts, it may be a hard option to beat. And finally, if we're going to stay with Aegis, I think the Redeemer gunboat is a phenomenal option. You know, as far as strapping guns onto a ship and going to town, the Redeemer is a terrifying guardian. You know, it's not going to have the fighter's agility, but with a turret on top, a turret on bottom, lots of forward-facing weaponry, and good shielding, you're plenty protected and able to really take on whatever you need to. Now, the ship I haven't mentioned yet, the one that you're probably going, Youngblood, you might have missed one, is one that hasn't gotten a whole lot of love in previous videos, and that's the Anvil Hornet. And I think this is where the ship is really designed to shine in the game. I'm specifically talking about the base Hornet and the Super Hornet. They're not fast, they're not nimble, but they can take an absolute beating, and with the ability to equip a ton of weapons, it's hard to beat the Hornet as a close-range escort. You know, range is likely, again, going to be a limiting factor, but like we mentioned, it isn't a unique problem here. But for being able to stay near your protector ship, put a ton of guns on target, and take a beating, the Hornet is a really, really good option. And the Super Hornet has the second seat for another set of eyes, and with enough weapons to go around, the Super Hornet is even a good option for defending against several different ships that are attacking at the same time. Now, I obviously left a lot of ships out of this video, primarily because I think they have some limiting factor in some scope, or because they didn't really fit with the situation I was envisioning. You know, for example, the Constellation is a really good fit for escort work, but probably for a larger ship like the Hull D or the Hull E. But if you're escorting a Freelancer or maybe another Constellation, the payment that you're going to receive in the end is probably not going to be real great compared to the operational cost that you're incurring with the larger vessel. I mean, hell, the Redeemer may even be pushing the limit in that regard too. So if you have other options or other ships that you would recommend, put them in the comments. I love seeing your guys' comments, and you guys do a really good job of interacting together. Otherwise, you know, stay tuned for more content. I appreciate you guys watching. Have yourselves a nice day, and take care.